Welcome back to the show, guys. Today, okay, this is epic. This one's going to rip your face off. We're diving into one of the most debated issues of our time. I've studied this a lot, and I decided, you know what? I'll do a solo episode later. I got to get like a stud expert on, okay? New brother and friend. This guest is going to blow your mind. He brings a bold and controversial perspective to the table about what? Climate alarmism. Climate change. Wait, no, global cooling. No, global warming. I forget what we're supposed to call it. Joining us is Dr. Calvin Beisner, founder of the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Great title. Dr. Beisner is a leading voice at the intersection of environmental science, economics, and Christian theology. He's also the author of Climate and Energy, The Case for Realism, just released last year, a thought-provoking critique of mainstream media climate narratives. Okay, we're going to hit like the hot topic questions today, okay? Like who benefits financially and politically from climate hysteria? Okay, or how do you respond to those who say reducing birth rates is essential for a sustainable future? Okay, get ready for an epic, shocking conversation that confronts the climate crisis and modern environmentalists head on. You're gonna finish this episode, I'm telling you, okay, with answers for your indoctrinated family members who call you a science denier. Okay, but guys, you're going to love it, okay? Listen to every minute of this conversation. We're going to have Dr. Calvin Beisner back on, I'm telling you. Firstly, I want to let you guys know, starting next week, I am taking my first ever sabbatical. Some of you have put messages in like, Seth looks really tired. Okay, well, the White Rose Resistance is now the fastest growing pro-life organization in America. We have an incredible team, and now I'm just taking the gas off a little bit, okay? Families first. We believe that at the White Rose Resistance. So we're going to be doing one episode a week during my summer sabbatical. We're still going to keep the show going. We're going to be bringing you some new and different and fun conversations from around the country and some interesting solo episodes, but we're moving to one episode a week, and we would love your prayers for just the organization and the families that represent it. We believe that we're going to make the family great again, and that's how we're going to save America, and that has to happen not just at the White Rose Resistance and here at the show, but in your homes as well. And so pray for us and my families. We take a little break, but continue to tune in once a week and share the episodes. Give us a rating and review. Let us know what you think. It helps us reach more people. We really appreciate that. And listen, if you believe in what we're doing here at the show and the White Rose Resistance, I mean, guys, like we just, with our partner church in Denver recently, because of so many evangelicals out there, and whoop to the Catholic nuns too, we love them, but a huge tick of evangelicals up outside of the late-term abortion facility in Boulder, Colorado. The most infamous abortionist in America, for goodness sake, just shut the doors of his business just last month. These are the kind of wins that are happening because of your support. If that matters to you and you want to see the local church great again through our chapters and our mobilization, go to thewhiterose.life, thewhiterose.life, and become an ally at $35 a month. Join the app. Get your battle bucks in the mail, or join at $70 a month at Air Support and join our Books in the Barracks book club, or make a generous gift to the new film I'm making, The Last Stand. It means so much to us. Guys, let's get into it. This is The Seth Gruber Show. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the show. I've been meaning to do this for way too stinking long because you're such a stud, and I'm just so excited to kind of introduce you to those who don't know you to my little humble show here. Welcome, brother.
Well, thank you very much, Seth. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be with you on your show. I've never been introduced on a show as a stud before.
There you go.
Golly.
It's the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Yeah, I wonder if I'll have any Kentucky Derby winners.
Well, brother, listen, you have all the right enemies. That's why it's one of the ways I know who to ask to just have cool conversations on my little show here, brother. It's like, man, if Big Eva and the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today and the globalist, pederast, pro-abortion, gender-bending rainbow sodomy cult all hate this guy named Dr. Beisner and try to discredit him, I'm like, he sounds like my friend already. But everyone got excited already, I'm sure, just from the introduction. But you're standing against all this climate alarmism, but you're not saying that there's no such thing as climate change, but you're bringing some rationality, some facts, some data, telling the church, don't worry, you're not a bad Christian if you don't listen to Christianity Today's letter on how you need to worship Mother Gaia. There's so much here, but what's your background and story? This isn't even your credentialed discipline, isn't it? Is it? Like, how did you get into this?
No, it's not. Now, my most closely related credential, I suppose, would be my master's degree in economic ethics, which led to Marvin Olasky and Herbert Schlossberg asking me to write the volume on economics for the Crossway Turning Point Christian Worldview book series back in the 80s. Which became my book, Prosperity and Poverty, The Compassionate Use of Resources in a World of Scarcity, which was supposed to have a chapter on population, resources, pollution, environmental quality, all of that sort of thing. And as I worked on it, I just told Marvin and Herb, that can't be done in a chapter. And they said, well, just do another book on that. So, I mean, who was it who recently said, I just saw a quote somewhere, fellow said, if you want to learn a lot about something, set out to write a book about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So that's what I did. I read just stacks and stacks of books and hundreds of articles on the interplay of population, resources, environment, pollution, that sort of thing. And of course, this was late 1980s. We had only less than a decade ago gotten out of the scare about global cooling, right? And so global warming wasn't too much of a big thing at that point. I read a few books about it at the time and basically commented in my book, Prospects for Growth, a biblical view of population, resources, in the future, that, I guessed that this fad would disappear in another decade or so, like so many other environmental fads. I was wrong. I was very wrong because obviously it hasn't disappeared. But what did happen was that through the 90s, because of those two books, I got invited to do quite a number of different seminars, speaking for colleges and schools and churches and whatnot on the interplay of Christian theology and worldview with these issues. And to make a long story short, as a result of that, I participated in a gathering of scholars in late 1999 that resulted in our putting together a simple 2-page statement of principles called the Cornwall Declaration on Environmental Stewardship, called Cornwall Declaration because it originated at a little gathering of about 35 scholars at a retreat center in West Cornwall, Connecticut. So that's where the name came from. The idea at the time in 1999 and early 2000 was to start an organization that would promote those basic principles. I didn't have the time to do that. I had just switched from teaching at Covenant College in interdisciplinary studies to teaching at Knox Theological Seminary in historical theology and ethics and things like that. So we didn't really get to do that until 2005, and that's when we began. And meanwhile, I just kept reading more and more. And so I read, as of about 8 years ago or so, I had read about 70 books and thousands of articles, hundreds of them peer-reviewed on the science of climate change. I came to the point where, as a layman, not a trained scientist, I knew enough about it that Dr. Roy W. Spencer, who is one of the world's foremost climate scientists, he's principal research scientist in climate at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. He's won an award from NASA for his work. He manages basically the satellite global average surface temperature monitoring system for NASA.
Wow.
Clear back about 10 years ago. So that's a good while back still. Roy said to me one day, Cal, you know all the arguments pro and con on the science of climate change better than any climate scientist I know. we all specialize in our narrow slices of the pie.
Right.
You read everything. Now, of course, nobody really truly reads everything, but my undergraduate work was in interdisciplinary studies. And so what I learned there was how to bring together the principles, the methodology, the instruments of a variety of different academic disciplines to focus all of them together on a complicated interdisciplinary field of study. And so that's basically what I did. And frankly, I benefit from the work of dozens of really outstanding climate scientists, as well as lots of other scientists and lots of economists and lots of theologians and Christian worldview specialists. We've got just under 70 in the network of Cornwall Alliance scholars. And
so you're the founder of Cornwall Alliance.
Yes.
Okay. So, Cal, one of the reasons that I got interested in this a few years ago was just in my study of what I like to call just the history of the sexual moral revolutionaries, the culture of death, all the weird baby killing, get rid of marriage, and the nuclear family weirdos of the 20th century that culminated in a book and film that we did called the 1916 Project, kind of tracing things back to 1916 when Margaret Sanger founded her first clinic in New York City. But one of the things that you've noticed, brother, okay, obviously, I know you know this, but that I came to realize is you cannot treat the leftist secular moral revolutionary order in like a cute little box. That's just not how it works. It all of these people seemingly knew each other. Even if you were like John Money and you wanted to have sex with little boys, still he's friends with Sanger and he's writing editor with Sexology magazine with all these other people who were funding Kinsey, who originally were giving money to Sanger, or they were going to parties with the Rockefellers, and your head just starts to spin and you just go, wait. All you guys had different kind of goals or lanes in the culture war, but it's almost like you all wanted the other to succeed and you were all helping the other to succeed. And this is where I started seeing like, oh, a lot of these people were big advocates of climate alarmism and blaming human beings as parasites and predicting that the world's going to implode and we're all going to die because Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec sun god, is not getting enough human sacrifice. So when I came upon your work, I'm like, oh man, Dr. Beisner's fascinating. We have to have a conversation with him. So one of the questions I had for you, brother, is what exactly is it? Because it used to be called the ecology crisis. And then it was called global cooling. Then it was called global warming. And now it's just called climate change. Why do they change the name of their agenda and movement so many times?
Well, I think partly we have to be fair to these people. Okay. So climate change is a phrase that has in fact been used since even the 1960s and 1970s. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, excuse me, was launched in 1988. And so they were already using that terminology. Excuse me again.
No worries.
But they spoke in terms of global cooling, especially during the 60s and 70s, because, oh, golly, that's the direction that global average temperature was headed. It had peaked in the early 1940s after rising from about 1910 till then on a path that was remarkably similar to the warming path that ran from about 1977 or 8 to the late 1990s, a very similar path, which indicates, by the way, that the whole notion that all of this has to be due to something that we've been doing just recently has to be false, right? Because we weren't doing it back between 1910 and the 1940s.
Right.
But what's happened is that essentially the warming as measured by real instruments, whether thermometers in ground stations or weather balloons with their instruments, or then by satellites starting in 1979, the warming has not happened nearly as fast as what the alarmists predicted it would. And so especially when there was essentially zero warming from late 1997 to approximately 2017, so almost a 20-year period with no significant upward trend in global average temperature, they began to realize, hey, we're not going to really communicate too well with people who are even just moderately well informed about this if we keep talking about global warming. So we got to start using this other term, climate change. It's one that they had already used, so you can't say that it's totally pulled out of a hat like a rabbit.
Right.
But it certainly was a change in focus of the messaging. And that's because the warming didn't happen that was expected.
Right. Interesting. One of the figures, I think probably, let's say, most famous or infamous, depending on your view of him, is Paul Ehrlich. Interestingly, years later, Paul Ehrlich actually sat on the board of Planned Parenthood, actually, and was infamous for recommending that if we can't curb population, then we might have to put a sterilant in the waters of urban neighborhoods to sterilize poor women against their knowledge. And then an antidote could be granted by the government if we decided to give it. That's the kind of character he was. But his 1968 book, what's that?
To qualified people, right.
Yeah, to qualified people, that's right. His 1968 book, of course, The Population Bomb, basically predicted like international chaos and starvation if specific population limitation policies that he recommended were not followed. I think he actually lost a famous bet about whether his... Hey, can you talk about this guy, how nothing came true, and this famous bet? Because it's an interesting story, right? In your lane.
Yeah, it's a great story. And it's a story about a man who was in many ways my mentor. That's the late Dr. Julian Simon. He was the one who had the bet with Ehrlich. Of course, Ehrlich, in his book, The Population Bomb, published in 1968, started it off basically by saying the battle to feed humanity is over. No matter what we do, hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death in the 1970s. Famine will happen all over the world because food production cannot keep up with population growth.
Right.
Now, not only did hundreds of millions of people not starve to death in famines in the 1970s, but the average calories per capita consumed around the world, especially in developing countries, skyrocketed during that very decade.
Wow.
What Ehrlich had failed to notice was the same thing that Thomas Robert Malthus, who wrote his essay on population in 1798, had failed to notice, and that John Stuart Mill corrected him for. And that was, people make resources. People grow food. And the more energy they have available to them, and the more equipment they have available to them, the more food they can grow. And so actually you wind up with, crop yield per capita, excuse me, rising drastically over the last couple of hundred years. And that rise has continued right up to the present day. Well, Julian Simon was a statistician, economist, business professor, and at the University of Maryland. And he had actually set out himself to write a book defending the need for population control. And the more he studied it, the more he became convinced, no, that's not true. Overpopulation can't even be defined by anything actually related to population, not density, not growth rate, not population age distribution, anything like that. You can't define it that way because, for example, when Ehrlich published his book, India had a population density at that time of a few hundred people per square mile. At the time, the Netherlands had a population density of around 1,000 people per square mile. But Ehrlich called India overpopulated, not the Netherlands. Why not? Well, if you read Ehrlich's writings carefully, you often see references to skin color. These people were of the wrong color. Now, that wasn't historically shocking because Ehrlich's thinking on this was rooted in the eugenics movement launched by Charles Darwin's nephew. His name escapes me at the moment, but he wrote a book on human potential, building on Darwin's notion of the struggle for the survival of the fittest. And his argument was that the Northern European white people were the most advanced of all races of humans. And to make sure that they would have plenty of food and other resources for themselves, the rapid growth of the inferior races, the POCs, the people of color, had to be restricted. And that launched the eugenics movement that, of course, eventually... Francis Galton, yes, thank you.
Actually, his half-cousin, I believe.
Half-cousin, thank you. Correcting me again. Good. I don't always keep those relationships straight in my mind. But
it's too much. Yeah.
That led to, of course, Margaret Sanger and Adolf Hitler, who were mutual admirers, by the way. And that kind of thinking led to what you've written so much about and did the wonderful film project about on the 1619 Project, that entire eugenics movement. So Simon, anyway, was set to write a book defending this. And the more he studied the science of it, the economics of it, all of that, the more he came to realize that because God made human beings in his image, and God is creative and productive, we can be creative and productive, and we can actually produce more than we consume in our lifetimes. Right. So he wound up writing a book called The Economics of Population Growth, published by Princeton University Press back in 1977. Wow. So I, in working on my own book, Prospects for Growth, A Biblical View of Population Resources in the Future, I read deeply in Simon's work, not just that book, but several more of his books, and I read many of his articles. When we published Prospects for Growth, Crossway, the publisher, sent the manuscript to Dr. Simon to ask him for an endorsement. And he gave a very generous endorsement. And then he wrote to me and asked, he said, "It's so nice to read something like this. This is much better work than most of the PhDs in the field that I read." And so we eventually became friends over that. And then he asked me to be the managing editor for another book of his called The State of Humanity that came out from Blackwell in 1995. That had 58 chapters by 60 authors, including 8 Nobel Prize winners. And I managed the text and all the data and all the building of graphs and whatnot for that incredible book. So Simon, when he read Ehrlich's book, he knew this was a bunch of baloney. Right. So he challenged Ehrlich to a bet. Ehrlich had said in this that we were running out of all kinds of different minerals, and we would see their prices skyrocket through the 1970s because the more scarce something gets, the higher the price goes. So Simon did a bet with him. He said, "You, Paul Ehrlich, you choose 10 minerals of your choice that you believe that the supply, the scarcity will be increased by the end of the 1970s, and I will bet you a certain amount per mineral." I think it was $1,000 per mineral, that instead the inflation-adjusted price of that mineral will be lower in 1980 than it was in 1970. Wow. Ehrlich took the bet, and at the end of the 1970s, in 1980, he turned out to have been wrong on all 10 minerals. And by the way, ever since then, every single one of those minerals and all the other things that we take out of the earth, all the resources that we extract from the earth, whether mineral, whether vegetable, even animal, the inflation-adjusted price of all of those is sharply downward over the long haul, and especially if you index it by wages. That is, how many hours do you have to work to buy a pound of butter or a gallon of gasoline or anything else that we extract from the earth, directly or indirectly? How many hours do you have to work? Well, the answer is far fewer hours now than you did 20, 30, 60, 100, 200 years ago. The reason for this is precisely that people aren't just consumers and polluters. We are producers and stewards.
Yeah.
And as I said, we can produce more than we consume in a lifetime. In fact, back when I was writing my book, I got the data. The average American male at that time produced 13 times as much as he consumed in a lifetime. The average American female, approximately 7 times, which was a great point for men to boast about until, of course, we remember that the average American female produced the average American male. So she gets to claim all that we produce too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Guys, it's Life Month. You know this, right? June is Life Month. And the left is so angry that we're taking back June, and it's not a small movement. It's taken off. And what better way to celebrate June as Life Month than to come to The Last Stand in Downey, California on June 21st, 2025. That's in 2 days, y'all. That's in 2 days. Have you gotten your ticket yet? Don't miss this one-day Christian festival with worship, speakers, activities, and fellowship. Why? Because in order to change this culture, which we're all like, whoa, we must stand for and fight for a culture of life. We're going to have speakers like Steve Deace and Alex Clark and Riley Gaines and Heidi St. John and Victor Marks and Pastor Jack Hibbs and David Harris Jr. and worship with Ben Fuller and 10th Avenue North and Influence Music and more. June is Life Month. We must destroy the culture of death, but also rebuild from the ashes a culture of life. This event celebrates family, America, and life. If you're in Southern California, just make the drive. You got 2 days to make the decision. Go to thelaststand.com and get your ticket today. Thelaststand.com and use code Seth10. That's Seth10 for 10% off your ticket. I'll see you at The Last Stand in 2 days, June 21st. So Paul Ehrlich had to pay out, and this was and is still, according to some people, this was the bombshell book. I mean, this was the bestseller book that just showed this is the science, this is where this is going, and if you disagree, you're a science denier. What other kind of predictions have the scientists gotten wrong when it comes to the climate change debate that is now being, well, not just wielded by leftists in order to accrue political power and usually devastate nations and the poor, but even by our evangelical betters? What else have they gotten wrong?
It might be easier, certainly less time consuming to list what they've gotten right. But let's see if we can give you a few examples. For one thing, their models, the mathematical computer models by which they try to simulate how much warming should occur in response to the carbon dioxide, the methane, the ozone, and other so-called greenhouse gases that we add to the atmosphere. Their computer models simulate warming as happening at anywhere from about 2 to 6 or 7 times the rate that it's actually been observed to increase. Now, why that's important is precisely because it really does address the whole question of who's the science denier here. And I love, there's a wonderful brief clip that you can watch on YouTube of the late Dr. Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist, brilliant educator. And just Google for Richard Feynman, that's Feynman, Key to Science. And in this, Feynman is speaking to a class of students in physics. And he says to them, you know, when we want to try to understand how something in nature works, first we guess. And the students laughed rather uncomfortably. What? We guess? That's science? He says, don't laugh. That's what we do. We guess. Now we put a technical term on it. We call it a hypothesis, right?
Right.
So first we guess how it works. Then we make predictions of what we ought to see, what we should observe in the real world if our guess is right. Then we go out into the real world, whether it's in the laboratory or in nature, and we make observations. And he says, if the observations contradict the predictions, then the guess is wrong. And it doesn't matter how beautiful your guess is or how smart you are, I would add,
Right.
or how many people agree with you, even if 97% of all scientists agree, right? Which has been
Right.
claimed over and over again, and that's a bogus notion. But it doesn't matter. If the observations contradict the predictions, your guess is wrong, period. And he says that's the key to science. Well, here's the deal. The theory behind catastrophic, alarming global warming driven by carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions from human activities says that in response to what we're putting into the air, we should be seeing the atmosphere warming at any of quite a number of different rates spat out by these computer models, right? But the actual real world observations instead are anywhere from about 1/8 to 1/2 of what the models say. Well, what that means is the observations contradict the predictions, and therefore the theory, the hypothesis, the guess
Right.
on which the models are based is wrong, period. That's the key to science.
There
And
you
anybody
go.
who contests that is himself the science denier. So there's one for you. Al Gore said back in,
Oh boy.
I think it was 2008, he put a date by which
Right.
the Arctic would be ice-free in the summer. He was wrong. It's not come about at all. He put a date by which Manhattan would have a significant amount of water above street level all through
No
Manhattan.
way.
He was wrong. It didn't come about. The alarmists have predicted that sea level would be rising at a particular rate. Well, as it turns out, it hasn't changed its rate of increase from prior centuries. It's going up at about 1.7 millimeters per year. That figures out to about 7 or 8 feet per century. And it's been doing that for centuries. They said that because of our man-made global warming, it would be accelerating. Well, there's been no acceleration. They've predicted that because of man-made global warming, there should be an increase in both the frequency and the intensity of all kinds of extreme weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods, heat waves, cold snaps too, by the way, all of these things. And the actual real-world observations show zero increase in either the frequency or the intensity of any of these things. We have the data in our book, Climate and Energy, the Case for Realism, that you have had a chance to delve into.
Yeah.
There's no increase in any of those. In fact, there is a very slight, probably statistically insignificant decrease in what's called the accumulated cyclone energy index. That's the total amount of energy generated by cyclones, hurricanes around the world every year. That's been declining slightly. Not a tremendously significant decline until you recognize that if there was no change whatsoever, that by itself falsified the claim that you would have more frequent hurricanes and stronger hurricanes. The claim goes on, and it's repeated in the mainstream media all the time, and politicians repeat it, but the hard data show no increase.
Wow. So Cal, there's a dizzying amount of questions I have. I'm sure that you've done very long lectures on this to address all the questions people have. But clearly, when you tell the world or the West that if you don't give us a ton of political power and vote for these specific people, because if we're not allowed to carry out the solutions to this looming catastrophe, then your children will not live very long. Like AOC said when she was running, I think she said we have 8 years left or something like that. So I think we're right around close to what she was saying. Yeah. Obviously, that's a very powerful motivator, especially for, can I say, strange hair dyed colored lesbian dance theory graduates from UC Berkeley who are already prone to being somewhat psychotic. This is an extremely powerful political tool, is I guess what I'm saying. Climate alarmism. Can you talk about what have been some of the consequences? Maybe start just with Ehrlich's books, but this is a podcast where we try to expose what the culture of death actually is, who's behind it, why it's so damaging, and why we need the local church to wake up. What have been the national and international consequences in human lives because of these people, this agenda, and its lies?
Let me give you one very, very specific one. The United States, back in the 1970s, adopted legislation to subsidize the production of ethanol from corn grown in this country. As a result, many corn farmers all over the Midwest switched from growing corn for human consumption or for animal feed to growing corn for ethanol production. A good friend of mine, Inder Gotlani, he's an Indian statistician and economist who has worked with the U.S. Department of the Interior for many, many years. Inder did a study back in, I believe it was 2012 or 2013, on the impact of that policy on the on the number of people who died of starvation around the world. I believe his study covered the period from 1990 to 2010. And he found that because we were diverting a huge part of our cropland from growing food to growing ethanol to make up for what was supposed to be the shortage of oil and gasoline, which didn't materialize, though Ehrlich had predicted it, right? He showed that the impact of that was to raise the price of basic staple food crops around the world enough that it probably cost about 190,000 deaths of starvation every year from 1990 to 2012 in developing countries. So that's one very specific sort of example of that kind of thing. But let me give you something else too, and this has specifically to do with the population issue and with the fears. I mean, you talked about the colored hair and lesbians and all of that, right? But it's not only people who really are maybe mentally a little disturbed. Sure. 40% of Gen Z people around the world polled showing that they fear to bring new children into the world because they're afraid of climate change.
40%.
39% of American couples aged 20 to 40 who do not have children report that their fear of climate change has been an important factor in their deciding not to have children. Now, Scripture tells us that children are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward, not his punishment. Like arrows in the hands of a mighty man, so are children in the days of one's youth. Happy is the man whose quiver is full of them. I can speak this as the father of 7 and grandfather of 18.
Go Cal.
It breaks my heart that so many people are being deprived of the joy of having children, of raising them up and seeing them begin to have children because they're afraid of climate change that they don't need to be afraid of. And I have the authority of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for that, right? I mean, this is the body that everybody refers to as...
That's right. 97%. So, Cal, what are you talking about? You're denying science. That I thought that's who we're supposed to cite to justify the alarmism.
No. The UN IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is supposed to be the Bible on climate science, right? I mean, that is the world's greatest authority, or so it tells us anyway. So all the alarmists tell us, right? Mm-hmm. In 2018, they published a special report titled Special Report on Global Warming of 1.8 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, by 2100, okay? In that special report, they said that if we did nothing to slow or stop global warming, if we just let her rip, okay, the amount of warming that would happen, according to them, and by the way, theirs are the models that exaggerate. I talked about that a little bit ago, okay? But according to them, the warming that would happen by the year 2100 would harm the global economy to the tune of reducing gross world product, total value of everything produced all over the world, by 2.6% in the year 2100. Okay. Now, 2.6% of gross world product is a whole lot. That's a great deal. And that might scare a lot of people. But the UN also predicts that between 2018 and 2100, gross world product itself would grow so much that if you now take that growth and apply a reduction of 2.6% to that, and calculate it to what they say the new population will be by that time, the average person in the world will be, instead of being 9.3%, or is it 9.03, not percent, times. Instead of being 9.03 times as wealthy as he is today, will be only 8.8 times as wealthy. Now, is that, I mean, President Biden called global warming, climate change, an existential threat. Is
Right.
the average person in the world being 8.8 times better off an existential threat? Not hardly, especially when you remember poverty is a far greater threat to human health and life than
Right.
anything related to climate. If you
Yep.
have income equivalent to, say, the bottom 5% of Americans, you can thrive in any climate from the Arctic Circle to the Sahara Desert to the Brazilian rainforest. But if
Wow.
you're trying to struggle along on the equivalent of $2 a day, which is the UN's definition of extreme poverty, you can't thrive in the best tropical paradise.
Right.
So as people overcome poverty, they can protect themselves from whatever climate might bring their way.
Yep.
This, by the way, is demonstrated by the fact that over the last 100 years, average annual human mortality due to extreme weather events has fallen by more than 98%.
Oh, wow.
That's
kind of a
that's
bombshell.
extraordinary. And why does that happen? It hasn't happened because there are fewer extreme weather events. It hasn't happened because those extreme weather events are less severe than they used to be. There's really been no significant change in their frequency or intensity. It's happened because people learned how to protect themselves, and
Yeah.
they built the wealth necessary to do that.
Yep.
If instead, though, we try to fight climate change, if we try to slow it, stop it, or reverse it by reducing our use of coal and oil and natural gas, what people, I think, in part mistakenly call fossil fuels, which put CO2 into the atmosphere when we burn them to make energy, right? If we try to stop the warming by reducing our use of those, we will slow, stop, or reverse the conquest of poverty in countries all over this planet. You know, for you and me in the United States, we're a wealthy country. And if we made that kind of a switch, well, we'd have a lot of inconveniences. We'd wind up with a whole lot more power blackouts all over the country because wind and solar, you know, it's not always windy, the sun's not always shining, and they're just not reliable, right? But hey, that's an inconvenience. For us in wealthy countries, that's about all it is. It's a pretty nasty inconvenience, but it doesn't threaten our lives. For people in developing countries, it can mean the difference between life and death. So
Wow.
here's another example of the
Please.
problems that come out of this. A few years ago, about 2.5 years ago, Sri Lanka, the government adopted a policy banning the use of fertilizers synthesized out of natural gas.
No,
Now,
there you go.
those fertilizers, by the way, go into the production of almost half of all the food consumed in the world. Roughly
Whoa.
half of the entire world population depends on nitrogenous fertilizers developed out of natural gas. So if we stop using natural gas, count half a billion, count half the world's population as without food. But Sri Lanka,
Whoa.
in order to meet its commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement,
Oh, gosh.
said you can't use nitrogenous fertilizers anymore in your crops. Well, the result was that all their crops failed. Now, their most important crop is tea for export. Those crops failed, and farmers all over Sri Lanka went broke, and people were going hungry. And so what did they do?
Wow.
Well, they rebelled, and they actually drove the government. The president and others at the top of the government escaped from the country, and the people took over. But that's the kind of thing that happens in developing countries in response to these sorts of policies.
Goodness gracious. I'm sure you've only scratched the surface. I heard another horrible story, Cal, about Ghana. What they did to Ghana. Is there a story about that too?
There's Ghana, there's Nigeria, there's Malawi. Lots of sub-Saharan African countries have been pushed by wealthy Western, Northern,
Antinatalists.
world, antinatalist environmentalists, okay, to reduce their use of fossil fuels or not begin using them in the first place or not expand it, right, in order to fight global warming. Meanwhile, by the way, I remember about 6 or 8 years ago, one of the evangelical creation care organizations claimed that Malawi was experiencing a huge change in the rain seasons and was having a great drought because of global warming happening in Malawi. I called my friend Dr. John Christie. He works with Roy Spencer, whom I mentioned earlier at the University of Alabama. The two of them manage NASA's global satellite temperature monitoring system. I said, John, can you give me the record of temperature for Malawi over the last, since 1979, right? And he gave it to me. There was no warming in Malawi over that period.
Oh my God.
But this was an evangelical creation care movement arguing that Malawi was experiencing drought because of temperature change there. So now that's been happening in lots of sub-Saharan African countries. But I have some good news for you, Seth.
Okay.
More and more of the presidents, prime ministers, whatnot, of those countries are following the lead of Narendra Modi, who is the prime minister of India. And they're saying, look, what you guys from the West are doing is climate colonialism.
Whoa.
You are forcing us to stay poor to prevent the warming that has happened to the extent that it has happened, primarily because of what you guys have done. We're not going for this anymore. So
Good.
India and lots of these other countries are actually increasing their use, not just of natural gas and oil, but also of coal. They're building coal-fired generating plants all over the place. And they're doing it because coal is the cheapest means of producing electricity that they have the technical know-how to manage.
Wow.
The best is nuclear. And part of what reveals the hypocrisy of so many people in this climate alarmist movement is that although nuclear doesn't put any greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, they still oppose it. And the reason they oppose it is that it makes energy so inexpensive that people can produce far more, and that means they can provide for far more people, and these people don't want lots of
There it
people
is.
in the world. The climate change alarmist movement is built on the population control movement, which is built on the eugenics movement, which is a thoroughly racist thing.
But first, we want to thank our sponsor of the Seth Gruber Show. They're a sole sponsor. I've turned down a lot of sponsors just because, it's hard to get as cool as EveryLife. EveryLife.com, America's baby diaper don't kill the babies company. That's right. My friends at EveryLife discovered a couple years ago that almost every, has it been 3 years now? Sorry, guys, I forget. Every major diaper company supports abortion. I like conservative Christians have the most babies. You know this, right? And then we buy our baby goods from people that would have killed our babies. Okay, we got to stop this. And it means that you and I have to fight with our wallets. This is one of the ways we win the culture war, actually. Have you seen the lessons of Dylan Mulvaney and Bud Light? You see that company almost just imploded because people said, I'm not spending my money with you because you are horrible human beings. Okay, so if you're having babies, if you know people who are having babies, the nursery at your church, the pregnancy center in your city that you support, everylife.com. Wipes, diapers, baby shampoos, lotions, non-toxic, all great. And use promo code Seth10, Seth10, 10% off your first order. Seth10, 10% off, everylife.com. And you sign up for the subscription. That's what my wife, Olivia, and I do. It comes straight to the house. And it always comes right when you're about running out of diapers. You don't have to do those emergency Walmart runs. Amen. Everylife.com, promo code Seth10. Everyone needs to get their baby stuff from EveryLife. And let's defund the culture of death. Thank you, EveryLife. That was beautiful. I want a standing ovation, everyone, for that summary. Cal, with the handful of minutes we have left, okay, I'd be remiss if we didn't just scratch the surface on Big Eva, okay? So we've got goodness. We've got the Evangelical Environmental Network, launched in 1993 to win average churchgoers to the green cause by using people like Christianity Today and the National Association of Evangelicals. I'm doing really quick here because I want your take on all this stuff. Jim Ball, who was the VP of the Evangelical Environmental Network, got the president at the time of the National Association of Evangelicals to hatch this plan to create a covenant, to create a consensus statement on Mother Gaia. I'm being facetious, but we need to worship Mother Earth and do everything the left tells us to do to save Mother Gaia. Anyways, these people don't like you. When the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today, Christianity Yesterday, led by now the editor-in-chief, Russell Moore, who, anyways, the listeners of my show know exactly what a snake he is. When they want to have these sophisticated PhD, lots of letter before your names, credentialed conversations, they never invite you. They never look up over to the Cornwall Alliance. They just go to the IPCC. Anyways, what the heck is going on in Christianity where they now are almost like, it feels like pawns, can I say, Cal, of the left? But then they say, but it's because it's a gospel issue. We have to do what the left tells us about Mother Gaia, or else we're not good Christians. Can you talk into that? Because you've been in the middle of that sort of fight.
Yeah, as Megan Bashan pointed out in her book, Shepherds for Sale, the mantra is always, if you love your neighbor, you're going to do this, that, or another thing. And by the way, another thing that comes out all the time is, well, global warming's going to hurt the poor more than it hurts anybody else. Yeah, so would global cooling, so would global stasis, so does anything, because the poor can't protect themselves as well as anybody else can. And so, by the way, also, as I just pointed out, does fighting global warming. It hurts the poor. It hurts the poor a lot, right? As you drive up the price of energy. And that drives up the price of everything else because you have to have energy for everything you do, making food, clothing, shelter, transportation, education, communication, everything requires energy. So if you drive up that price, you drive up the price of everything else, and the poor are hurt more than anybody else. So if you love your neighbor, if you care about the poor, you have to get off the global warming, alarmist, climate change bandwagon. I'll put it that way. Kind of flip the rhetoric.
Good for you.
Well, okay. Back in, I believe it was the year 2012, I published on the Cornwall Alliance's website, which, by the way, cornwallalliance.org. That's cornwallalliance.org. Awesome. I published an article called Evangelical Environmentalism, Bought and Paid For by Liberal Millions. And in there, out of 1099s, I'm sorry, not 1099, 1090, Form 990s.
990s, yeah.
Form 990s, right. Out of Form 990s, I got the specific numbers of what various different liberal foundations, Rockefeller Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, Tides Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, on and on, all these Energy Foundation, what they were giving to these various different evangelical environmental organizations, like the Evangelical Environmental Network, or AROSHA, or Plant with Purpose, and plenty of others as well, Creation Care. I put the numbers in there. Now, that was a long time ago. Megan's book, as you know, has updated all of that. And the amounts are many multiples of what they were back at that time. But let me give you just one story here. Back in 1993-94, a group of people set about starting what was called the National Religious Partnership on the Environment. The two co-founders of that were Carl Sagan of Cosmos fame. You know, the cosmos is all it is or ever was or ever will be. A takeoff on God is the one who is and was and is to come, right? Sagan, the atheist Marxist. And the other was the dean of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, who was quite the New Ager. He had baptismal ceremonies for animals from the Bronx Zoo every year. Oh my
gosh.
So those were the co-founders of this National Religious Partnership on the Environment, which had a Jewish section and a Roman Catholic section and a mainline Protestant section and an evangelical section. Guess what the evangelical section was? The Evangelical Environmental Network. Right. And guess where the funding for all of that came from? The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which is one of the world's biggest funders of population control and Planned Parenthood, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and Tides, and Hewlett, and more. All of this came out of NRPE. This is right at the very roots of probably the best known evangelical creation care organization. And it has continued to get its funding from such, and from George Soros as another example. Certainly, there's plenty come from there. So, yeah.
Why aren't they trying to fund you? Because, you know, the left says they care about the poor and the disenfranchised, Cal. So why aren't they funding you? Because through your rational approach to these issues and your deep knowledge, you could be helping encourage governments around the world to pull their people out of poverty. Why aren't they writing you checks?
Well, if they tried, I'd turn it down. I mean, it's as simple as that. You know, Danny Thomas, there's a plaque in the St. Jude Children's Hospital here in Memphis. Danny Thomas, who started that, said, I would rather be supported by 1 million people giving $1 apiece than by one person giving $1 million.
Yeah.
And that's my attitude with the Cornwall Alliance.
Amen.
We are not supported by any big corporate donations or anything like that, never have been. And our attitude is, I would much rather be supported by hundreds, thousands of just private individuals, godly people who want to celebrate humanity made in the image of God, who want to support an approach to these things that rests clearly on a biblical worldview and that honors God instead of being supported by big foundations or big corporations. So that's the way we operate. And I would turn it down if any of those offered that kind of money to me, because it invariably winds up compromising your integrity. It's a conflict of interest.
Yep. Amen. Brother, Cal, there's so much more we could talk about. I just want to remind people listening, I said that because guess what? Those people would never offer you money. There's a reason why they want to write checks to Christianity Today, okay? And to the Gospel Coalition and to the ERLC, the political arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, and the list goes on, of course. There's a reason why left-wing, pro-abortion, anti-natalist, pro-homosexuality, abortionist globalists are not looking to fund people like Dr. Beisner, because everything he says and does would not help them accomplish their goals. I mean, this is not rocket science stuff. There's a reason why these people look at Russell Moore and various big evangelical leaders as useful idiots, to quote Lenin, as bought and paid for hirelings to push forward the secular moral revolution with a little bit of Christianese sprinkled onto it to sway evangelicals. Dr. Beisner, thanks for standing boldly, providing the truth, not just with the theological convictions and the biblical worldview, but with all of the data that you spent so many years researching. I'm sure we'll talk again. I'd love to have you back on in the future. But this is a piece, guys, of this war against the family, against the Imago Dei. And the reason that they hate the West is because they hate Christianity, which built the West. It actually is as simple as that. But this is a battle that's been raging for a long time. And brother, thanks for being in the ditches.
Well, thank you very much, Seth. So glad to do it. And if I may, just a quick little commercial here.
Tell us about your book.
Energy, The Case for Realism, 16 chapters by 16 different authors, 9 climate scientists, several energy experts, several economists, all about the fact that, human-induced climate change is real, but it's not catastrophic. The benefits will probably wind up outweighing the harms from it, and there will be both, and the benefits of adaptation far outweigh the benefits of trying to mitigate this stuff, trying to slow the warming. In fact, life is going to be much better after climate change than it was before. And I have, as I said earlier, the authority, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for that. Even if we did nothing to fight global warming, the average earthling would be producing 8.8 times as much per year as he was producing in 1918. That's pretty good.
You hear that, guys? The United Nations has declared that you don't have to be alarmed about the climate. In fact, you can be encouraged and excited that humans will prevail, will adapt, and your grandchildren will be better off. UN stamp approved. Dr. Beisner, we hope to have you back on one day. Bless you. The Lord protect you. And we're so grateful for you. We'll see you soon.
Love to do it. Thank you very much. God bless.
Until next time, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.